Intro. So thanks everyone. Welcome again to another exciting episode of what's turned into a podcast called Meet the Authors. Originally, it was just a bunch of authors getting together and talking about some of the stuff that was going on around us and affecting us, which virtually since COVID. And but now we're publishing these episodes out on YouTube and on my website, and any of the authors who participate are also welcome to share this out. So you might find this podcast in many different locations. I'm Chuck, and Justin is co-host here. Let's get started. Today we're featuring Angela Darling, who is a prolific horror writer.
Right, that guy's looking at you. Oh man,
I like that word.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I was checking out your website, and you've got quite a lot of stuff out there. And the really intriguing part that I saw was, maybe we'll save it for a little bit later. The Choose Your Own Adventure stuff was really kind of mind-blowing to me, because I'd never, I remember as a kid, always I spent countless hours in libraries just doing like one book and going through and exploring. And so. But before we get to that stuff, let's talk about our icebreaker introductory topic, Klara and the Sun. What did you guys think of that?
So I'll go first here, Chuck. So I got the audiobook, right? Because I do audiobooks a lot. I drive a lot, sit in the office all day. And then when I'm not sitting there playing with the kids, doing 50 million other tasks. But I don't know if it was the author or the narrator of the audiobook, but man, this book was a slog to get through, man. It was slow. And it was like, it was a little too, I don't know. I don't want to say, the only thing I can think of is like Japanese. It's a little too anime kind of for me, I guess. And it was a slog, and like I stopped paying attention several times. But and then I mean, it had a decent story arc, but I just wish there was more action and more kind of things going on. There was a lot of talking and inaction, but that's what I thought.
Yeah.
Other than that, decent book. So
sure.
What do you think, Chuck?
Yeah, I guess since I'm asking people to express their opinions, I can put my neck out there too. Kazuo Ishiguro, the first book that I read of his was Never Let Me Go, which completely blew my mind, because I've never read an actual literary approach to science fiction. Like he is not a traditional science fiction writer. He started with traditional literature and is moving into the science fiction realm. So that which is evident in his style. He spends a lot of time with the characters and deep in the characters' consciousness and working out how they feel about things. That's his typical of his writing. So I wasn't disappointed, because I expected that. And that's what I appreciated about his style, is he kind of gave me permission to explore characters a little bit more deeply in some of my own writing. I don't do what he does. I mean, I'll admit that at times it gets slow, and I think it's hard, especially the main character for this one, given that it was, I don't think I'm spoiling anything to say that it was a robot. I mean, that's kind of the whole premise.
Yeah.
To capture truly how a robot would perceive the world is going to be a little flat. Robots are not that even I could even say 10 or 15 years from now, we're still not going to be in a position where robots are having hugely deep intellectual conversations.
Right. It's like where it's learning what the sun is, and that the pollution is bad. It's all this other stuff. But it's definitely the a character driven story, and not like a story driven story. You know what I mean?
So the plot, I didn't read it. I didn't have time, unfortunately, but I'm curious what you said, Justin, a little earlier, and coming at it from kind of just an author perspective in terms of pacing, and because the audiobooks are much different than sitting down and reading a book from start.
Right. Yeah.
Do you think that it was?
I would think that they would be more hard, because I think the voice inflections, how someone reads can make a big difference. You,
Oh,
you don't
absolutely.
want someone to be too animated where they're trying to do voice inflections and too many things, but you also, I've listened to some books where it was like, it was almost listening to that guy from the Ferris Bueller, movie. Ferris Bueller.
And Mueller,
And that
yeah.
guy's reading to you, and after about 10 minutes, I'm just like, this is really.
So as far as the pacing goes, what I found interesting was, so I needed to kind of get through this book relatively quickly, so I kept turning up how fast it would go, and I was still following along when it was at twice the speed, right? And I said, okay, I can still follow the book. So that's the pacing.
You're like on turbo mode. I love it.
Right.
Audio book goes chipmunks.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking.
But like,
Tim Taylor, more power.
yeah.
And the chipmunks read your book.
Yeah. Well, it's good because they don't, like, the pitch stays the same. It doesn't get higher pitch or anything. It's Audible is like super good with that. And I read really fast, like with my eyes when I'm reading. So it's helpful to kind of like match that pace with my audio. So because otherwise he's reading and he's like, the sun moved across the
That would drive
floor.
me nuts.
Oh my goodness. I'm like,
No, you're exaggerating.
5 minutes later.
I'm exaggerating, yes, but
I felt like that was the narrator trying to stay in like the mind of an artificially intelligent robot, and I thought that was necessary. But I do think that maybe the narrator got a little too hung up on that, and could have made it a more approachable character by adding additional inflection and stuff. Some of the stuff Guy was talking about.
Yeah, well, it's like you're right, Chuck, and they're staying in the mind of this AI that's like learning what the world is, and it's like very like a baby, right? And it's like, oh, this is the learning, like what this is, what that is, and so yeah, he's staying in that mindset, and it's in character and in line with the book, but it's just like I said, it's hard, it's kind of boring. Sorry.
Not known for this.
I'm not gonna try to convince you. I mean, you and I like a lot of our tastes overlap a lot, but in some places we diverge. I liked it. I wouldn't call it like, it is definitely not Never Let Me Go. That was great and mind blowing. This one was good, and so not quite there, but I would still give it a 3 to 4 on my scale, being 5 being the highest, with the caveats that you have to like that sort of book.
Yeah. I would give the story arc like a good score, because of like I don't want to spoil it either, but there's some stuff that happens, and at the end, like, it's like, oh, okay, but then I guess it could have been shorter. Not short, but
how long was it?
It was 9 hours long, as far as the book goes.
Wow.
Was that on turbo speed or?
No, it was. So I got through it in 5 hours.
Okay. Let's crank this up.
Yeah.
But,
so I'm not gonna fault it. I mean, a good story, good on him. I'm not gonna be like, this is the worst thing ever. Just not my cup of tea, really.
Right, I got you. Cool. All right, well, there you have it, everybody. Take from that, if you like it, I'd say that's enough encouragement to give it an honest try.
Yeah.
Let's move into the Meet the Author segment now.
All right.
So Angela, this is about you.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I was just having fun talking with you guys.
Okay, so I guess this is a good place to talk about, like, give us a little bit of background on, like, what have you been doing? How did you get to where you are, and like, what's your latest project that you'd like to tell people about?
Well, I've been writing since I was like 10 or 11. I finished my first novel when I was 15, but that's never going to see the light of day because it's absolute garbage. I read it back now, I'm like, oh my God, I'm just cringeworthy. But it was a start. I actually came across Fallen was the first book that I published. And I wanted to write a book. I get inspiration different ways. I was really interested in an old-fashioned duel. And that was kind of, I just wanted to write a book about an old-fashioned duel. So I have kind of, I have more mainstream horror that I've really been working on as of late, but back in the beginning days of my writing career, it was a lot of Gothic, Victorian Gothic type horror, which is much different type genre. It's coming out into the industry now again, but like Shirley Jackson, that sort of stuff, Edgar Allan Poe. So I wrote Fallen with just this premise that I wanted to write about an old-fashioned duel, and then it kind of grew from there. I was like, okay, well, maybe two brothers are dueling, and what do two brothers duel over? Oh, a woman. And the plot just kind of grew from there. But yeah, I can't remember what the question was.
Well, so you talked about a little bit of Gothic horror, like your Gothic horror inspirations like Poe and Jackson,
Yes.
and maybe more contemporary authors like maybe V.C. Andrews with his kind of Gothic horror.
Yes.
And then you said you're moving away from that a little bit. So what kind of inspiration for your new stuff do you kind of have?
So now, so I wrote this book, The Dib Book. That was probably one of my most commercial books that I've written, and it's actually probably one of my most successful ones to date. It came out in 2019, and the inspiration around that was actually kind of twofold. So I went to Peru and wandered around in Lima and the old catacombs, and it was just fascinating. I love history, and they have such a rich culture down there that I was just, I want to do something with this. You know, there's a lot of really interesting, this land is very old. I mean, coming from the US, you know, I mean,
Yeah.
if you go to Europe, then it's super old land, but down there was conquistadors and all kinds of history.
Yeah.
But then I kind of got inspired by an incident that happened when I was young and stupid. Well, I'm old and stupid now, so at least I'm going in that direction. But I played around with a Ouija board when I was 25, 26, drunk with some friends, and we're like, hey, let's mess around with a Ouija board. And
I've seen that movie.
yeah, I know. But I'm a very faithful person. You know, I'm not crazy about religion, but I do believe that there is something loving. I don't know. But whatever we talked to that night was, we talked with something, and it was not loving. It was scary and dark. And my best friend Jamie and I were the only ones on the board at that point. And I know Jamie, she would not ever mess with me because it's so easy to do. But she and I were we are in contact with something, and I write about it in the preface of the book, but I just kind of wanted to merge a little bit of those two pieces of obsession for me, I guess, in some way, and the Dib Book was the result.
Okay, excellent. For our agenda here. Charles?
Yep. Yeah, that's interesting. That reminds me, I think that's pretty interesting to like tie in your reality with some of what you're writing about, especially in horror. There's a movie that I was watching recently about that followed that same line. Like the protagonist of the movie was actually a writer who had written this series of books about a witch. And it turned out that one day at one of her meetings, somebody in the audience approached her and said, "I know who that witch is." And then the whole thing, kicks off this entire sequence of horror that was really it was quite fascinating. So
wow.
So I think it's kind of cool that you're tying that together.
Yeah.
Got a question for you. What's always curious to me is, so in the genre of horror, there's like the really gruesome, like you like Saw and that sort of stuff, and then there's the like Alfred Hitchcock, I think, could be called horror to an extent.
Yes.
Some of the stuff he does, and he's mainly messing with your head. And then there's that whole like gradient there. Like, when you're writing or when you're thinking about approaching your projects, do you pick like where you're going to be in that gradient, or you just kind of go with it and wherever it lands is like where you land?
You know, I actually read that question before before logging on today, and I had kind of an idea of what I wanted to say, but then I thought back to some of the endings of some of my books, and I'm like, no, you're not. Like, I love the Hitchcock horror. There's such a classiness to shadow and mystery, and maybe not all of the answers are explained at the end of the book. Maybe things are a little open-ended, and I think that horror as a genre, you can kind of get away with that a little bit more. But I, I want to say I'm not usually all about the gore, but I don't outline. And wherever the story kind of leads me, then that's just kind of what it is. And I used to think that I didn't really have a whole lot of gore in my novels, but then I wrote the book, and people that have read it, they know which scene I'm talking about. It's not pleasant at all. But it's integral. It's not exploitative blood and gore, because that's the only vehicle that you're relying on to get horror across. No, I don't believe in that at all. I'm not a big slasher fan. I think Saw was a different type of slasher movie in that it was really crafty with the way that it kind of tied all of the movies together, and the timelines kind of overlapped and you didn't know it until the end of the movie. I thought that was really clever, but for the most part, like Tourist does, and I stay away from that.
I saw that movie.
It's
Tourist?
yeah,
Well,
yeah.
I haven't seen it.
Never travel again. But yeah, no, in terms of, I guess the gore has to be done to push the story forward. I don't like to throw in like random heads or.
Okay,
Yeah.
so not like gratuitous. There's got
Yeah.
to be something about it that makes sense with the plot that moves the story along, is what you're saying.
Right.
That's interesting. I think that like in science fiction, it's kind of the same way. Although, there's an element of world building that I'm wondering if, well, with your Victorian stuff, you probably have some like a lot of your current readers, may not know certain things about the setting. Do you find you spend a lot of time with like reminding them or crafting the world in which they're going to have to live out?
Yeah. No, I think with the more contemporary stuff I've been doing, I've been kind of staying away from that just because the pacing of the story is most important and kind of keeping things going. Otherwise, guys like Justin might get bored. I'm just teasing. But with Gothic horror, if you've ever watched, some of the Gothic movies, like one of the more contemporary ones, I think Crimson Peak was one of them. The house itself is an entity, and it's like every Gothic horror movie, there is a house that is either evil or so you have to kind of spend a fair amount of time creating that setting, that ambiance. But it's a different kind of balance between contemporary horror and that Gothic horror, because you still don't want to lose your audience and want to kind of keep things moving.
Yeah.
And I think loved Thomas Hardy growing up, and one of my favorite books that he ever wrote, it's not a horror book obviously, but it was Tess of the Dubervilles. Loved it, fell in love with it, but I tried to read the book and he spent a whole chapter describing the moors of England. I'm like, oh my god, can you just get on with it already? I know it's the 20th century, but still.
That's one of my favorite books too, but you're absolutely right when you describe the way that the tedious way that he was describing everything.
It's like, I got the picture. Can we move?
Yeah.
Cool. I didn't have this on the list, but I kind of want to ask about the choose your own adventure. Like, how did you?
Yeah, I'm curious about that too.
So, for legal purposes, I can't use that phrase. That's
sorry. Choose your own adventure.
Trademarked phrase. No, and it's fine. But the genre itself is not trademarked. But I do remember, I mean, obviously, we all grew up with those books. I remember standing outside the library. I'm totally showing my nerd here. But standing outside the library and my elementary school and just waiting for the library to open up so that I can go and I can see if this one book. And there was one book that they wrote that was scary enough to get me. The other ones were sci-fi and, but the one book was always checked out. Um, so I don't even know where it came from. One day I was just kind of like, it would be awesome if someone would write a horror series for adults, basically kind of like a survival guide. So that's kind of how that came about. It is a different process writing that entirely, because now I'm just sitting around and it feels macabre and dark, but I'm sitting around finding 19 ways I want to kill my readers. I can get creative, but there's going to be one path that will lead you to the end.
Yeah, I told my wife about those, and I was like, well, I know that like most of the endings are probably not going to end well.
Right.
No, that's horror for you. A lot of it doesn't end well. I'm not a Hollywood ending kind of girl anyway, so.
That's awesome. Well, I think that's a really good. I'm seeing a lot of that type of thing pop up nowadays. I'm seeing like, I know my daughter has several like of that kind of not horror, but like Carmen Sandiego. She's got her little adventure books where you can pick the endings. And I've seen there are actually some interactive like television shows that you can do that with now.
Bandersnatch, yeah.
And then there's like you had mentioned, Survival Guide. They just did a new one with Bear Grylls on Netflix, and it's like choose your own adventure.
Oh,
so cool. You can pick what he does, but he does like a bunch of dumb stuff. It's like, why are you doing that? It's like
Bear Grylls for you.
But he's like 5 minutes in. He's like, I just got dropped off. Should I eat this grub or this termite? And I'm like, why didn't you bring any food with you?
I know, dude. Did you not plan ahead? Make some rice or something. I did stumble across a book. It was kind of along that same vein. It was how to survive a night on Mount Everest or something like that. And I thought that was pretty interesting. But yeah, it's coming out a lot more interactive. And I loved the horror ones specifically. I mean, I love sci-fi, nothing to knock on sci-fi. I'm a big Star Wars fan. I've got a dog named Chewbacca, for God's sakes. But
that's funny because in the last episode, go ahead. Sorry,
but yeah, no horrors. I can't even remember what I was saying. My train of thought, I just get so excited.
So I had I saw your website, and I saw you have all these different like book series, right? With these different families kind of.
Yeah.
That you follow. Is there any like, is this all in the same universe? Do you have different universes? Do they cross over at all? Do any of your characters like from one book end up in another book?
Yeah, that's a good question. There was one series, the Thorn Family Saga, where there was this character that I wrote in the second book that I just kind of fell in love with. And I was like, I want to know more about her. And these characters, they just kind of, I don't know how to explain it, but they just kind of come to life when I'm writing. They don't really give them a backstory. I know some people plot things out very tediously. I'm like, dude, I could be spending this time writing too much. But that's just how it works for me. But there's this one character that I want to know more about her. So I actually did kind of a spin-off series around her family and kind of how she came to Thorn Manor. But for the most part, with the exception of the series that I did based out of Rogue River, Oregon, they're all in different universes. Yeah, but Rogue River was really interesting because the first book I wrote was called 2 Miles, and it's essentially about people that go missing in this 2-mile vortex. And I don't know if you are familiar with where Rogue River is, but there is a vortex out there so of course, for research purposes, I had to go there with my dad and be like, oh, let's check this out. And
well, you didn't disappear, so that's good.
Exactly, we came back safe. But it was weird though, because it was so dense that you didn't hear any animals. There were no birds. It was a different kind of energy for sure. You could feel it, but I don't know that it's quite so. I just wanted to write about it,
Yeah.
It's one of the good things about that I enjoy about just being a writer generally is that if I find a character that I like, then you can just follow them and you can write it.
Yeah, exactly.
A good like 50% doesn't ever see the light of day, but
that's like so many times, like you have to delete so much and rewrite it again. Something you love so much, right? You're like, this is such a great line, and then you're like, it doesn't work. So you got to get rid of it.
But I wrote this line when I've had 2 glasses of wine. I must
Yeah.
keep it.
It's
Yeah,
a
no, I don't know anything. Now
Yeah.
my writers of yore used to take opium and drink large amounts of alcohol.
There you go.
That doesn't work for my writing. I don't know about the
That's-
opium part, but
So
definitely.
that's what I was going to do tonight. I got some opium. You know,
I know Seattle's boring, but we're not quite that boring.
Oh, all right. That's a thank you for that. That was a lot of fun. Let's talk about let's open it up for the group discussion. And just so the audience knows, what we normally do is we have a couple of different authors at the same time, and we're trying it differently this time. We're only having you, and so you get a little bit more time, and we're also going to like kind of work in the group discussion spend a little bit more time in the group discussion.
Okay.
So the first question may make no sense to you guys, so I don't know. It is, so there are 3 series of superheroes that came out kind of at the same time, about I think 5 or 10 years ago. They're Heroes, 4400, and Alphas. And you probably never heard of Alphas. That's not a very widely known one. But if you had to pick, which one of those would you be the more inclined to either be a member of, like the superhero team, or which one would you like to, just as a series, which one would you prefer? Did you prefer over the others? It's up to you, how you answer.
I'm Googling 4400 right now.
So I am familiar with Heroes and 4400. I never watched 4400. I watched Heroes. I liked Heroes until like they started doing this time travel stuff, and anytime you go start time travel, and it's so complicated, and it's like so wrong the way they do it. And it's like,
it was good up to a point.
it's like, oh, he's gonna leave her there in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, so they have a bunch of like storylines that they don't tie up, and they're just like leave it. And they're like, all right, we're done with time travel. I was like, what happened here? Where'd this person go? So that was Heroes' downfall, kind of. And that happened like at the same time, if you remember, back when they had the big writer's strike, right? In like 2010 or 11. And like all the writers were striking, and then they couldn't figure out what to do with the show, and just went. So I stopped watching it. It had a good premise early, but then it was like, oh,
I'm so frustrated with that. Killed Firefly that way too.
Yeah. After one season, at least they got a movie though. I thought the movie was good.
Yeah, that's true. The movie wasn't bad.
Yeah, it kind of tied up some loose ends. Killed Wash.
When you're writing horror, are you primarily focused on the premise, the horror mechanism, or are you primarily focused on the characters that that are going to experience that? How do you kind of start do you bring in the premise and then bring in characters you like, or do you develop the characters that make sense for the premise?
That's a really good question. And I never really thought of it that way. I think definitely if I had to kind of choose which one it's more driven, whether it's more narrative driven or character driven, I would say character. I have a general idea of what I want to happen in the book. But again, like I said, I don't really outline, because I feel like for me, I get those inspired little moments of, ooh, what would happen if I made her this? Or maybe she was a ghost all along, or the Sixth Sense thing. I don't know. But I'm very stubborn. If I write something a certain way in an outline, I'm going to stick to that no matter what inspiration might come my way. And I feel like that kind of takes away from some of the organicness of it, I guess.
The spontaneity.
Yeah. So I think I have a general idea of what I want the narrative to look like and what events I want to happen in the book, but the characters are really the driving force for me in terms of how they respond to certain things and who they become. Again, I have kind of a general idea of whether I want this person to be bad or I want this person to be good. And that's it. They just kind of take it from there.
So guys, since you chimed in, do you have any preference in the 4400 versus Alphas versus Heroes conversation?
But I honestly don't. I did watch a little bit of the Heroes when it was first started. I thought it was kind of interesting. The concept that individuals would have individual powers that they didn't quite understand themselves. So I think it was the self-discovery of it that I thought was probably the most interesting part of the show, was how each individual would react to discovering themselves and trying to hide themselves or reveal themselves. I thought that was really fascinating. I'm not a huge television watcher because I for a long time, most of my life, I was a workaholic. So I had careers that typically would burn me out for 16, 18 hours a day. But now that I'm a writer, I find that I read a little bit for pleasure, but mainly I'm reading for research, and I'm working as hard as I used to, but I'm writing. So I'm always looking at the new research. I'm always looking at the new premises. I'm always looking at other things and looking at what other authors are doing. I'm trying to learn how to market. So I find that I spend very little time actually being entertained myself anymore. I have to make time to actually read really good books so I can kind of keep stimulated. But I'm at a phase now where I'm just churning to try and kind of get it all out.
I hear you.
So, Guy, I had a question for you, if you don't mind. You're an experienced gentleman, obviously, and you've written your books. And I'm not sure how old you are. I don't want to be rude. I'm just asking, like, how old were you when? What's that?
Ancient.
So, like, how old were you when you published your first book? Because you're relatively new, right?
I'm relatively new. I published my first book. I've been writing as a way to relieve stress for decades. I wrote my first book when I was a preteen, but I was homeless by the time I was 13. So I didn't really have a lot of energy to put into stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then I got into a career, and I was a family man, and it seemed like there was always something burning up my time. But when my son was young, and I was a single parent, he would go to bed early. I couldn't go out because I couldn't afford the babysitters or anything. So I would write for him.
Yeah.
I wrote a bunch of short stories for him for a while that never got published, never saw the light of day. But those stories actually churned. And so there's a book that's going to come out in about under 2 months now called Curse of Cortez. The premise of that story started when I was writing short stories for my son 30 years ago.
Okay.
So, but it developed, it went through years of research into actual history and archaeology and everything else in the region to really get meaty. And so my first book I published in November of 2020, but I've been writing for a while.
Yeah.
And I retired about 2 years ago, and it was the process of retiring that allowed me to actually really focus, right? Because before I would write because it would be 11:30, 12:30 at night. I was done working. I was burned out, but I was still too wired to go to sleep.
Yeah.
So I would spend an hour or two writing, and that was how I would wind down. But it was really hard to finish a story because I might have 2 or 3 nights where I didn't get to write anything, and then I would be figuring out, where did I leave off? What was I thinking? It was this constant starting over, kind of never really getting it done process.
Yeah.
And I had multiple stories I had wanted to start. So when I retired, I finished the story that's going to come out in a couple of months called Curse of Cortez first. And then I started the second story called Swarm. And when I finished Swarm, the timing was mid last year, 2020, and it was appropriate because it had political influences and context and everything else. And so all my beta readers who wanted me to publish Cortez for years said, first get Swarm out and then you can do Cortez. So now I've got Cortez coming out. I'm done. I'm finishing up the sequel to Swarm. That should be ready to go out at the end of the year. So now I'm just in this creative kind of churn mode, trying to kind of get these stories out the door.
That's pretty cool. Like you and Angela both, you started writing early and you've been writing so much and everything. And like, I'm relatively new. I just started writing maybe 3 or 4 years ago. So I don't know if it's like you have to be born with it in your blood to get it right or whatever.
Absolutely not. No, you can pick up a pen tomorrow for the first time and be fabulous at it. I think a lot of the success as a writer comes from also reading a lot.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I got started. My mom was she always had her nose in a book. One of those bodice ripping romance books with Fabi on the cover.
Right.
I of course didn't go in that direction, but
Yeah.
I start reading a lot, and then of course I wonder what it would be like to create worlds of my own and characters.
Well, yeah, exactly. But I think that's a good segue into like the next kind of topic that Chuck has here, which is, what are you reading, watching now? What are you kind of doing when you're not writing? What else you do? What kind of pop culture are you consuming at the moment, I guess?
I play a lot of video games, actually.
Okay.
I'm a gamer. I just got a PS5 and
Nice.
and gone in the Valhalla.
Okay.
Valhalla. But other than that, I do try to still make time to read every day. Right now, I'm actually reading a book by Rachel Kane. She recently passed away, unfortunately, from cancer. And I think her last book, the 5th book in the series, came out in March. So I'm kind of trying to get caught up and read it all.
Excellent. Cool.
Yeah, I'll tell you. So I've got a few things that I've been picking up lately. I've been reading through the Harry Potters because that's something that I do with my daughter. So where she's already caught up and passed me. She's on book 3. I'm on book 2. I just started book 2. I'm also reading the Secret History of Witches, which yeah, it's about this thick. It's another one of those. I'm 3/4 of the way through it, and I'm blown away by the story and by the way that the author weaves these talismans that the book is really kind of centers around through multiple generations of witches and hiding from persecution.
So is this inspired, Chuck, by like any kind of history, like of the witch trials or anything? Do they have like real history that they're kind of telling a story through?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, it definitely tracks with, like, right now, my most recent, the most recent in the line of witches is in just before World War II in England, and has just like met the Queen. So it's kind of an interesting story of. There's a lot of the stories about like kind of the oppression and the dynamic between in the patriarchal society of trying to keep a tradition alive that's kind of counter to the overall culture of whatever environment they're in, because witchcraft is not accepted anywhere in the world that they visit, that they live in.
Yeah.
So it's just the treatment. It's a spectacular book. If you get a chance, I would read it. It's not, and there's a lot of action in it too. So it's not one of those where it's a deep introspective journey. Although there are those moments.
It actually sounds really interesting because I am working on a project right now called Hawthorne, and essentially it's kind of a prequel to this Thorne family saga series, but it takes place in the witch times. And it's interesting because a lot of people didn't know that. I'm a nerd about history and genealogy research and stuff. My ex-husband's ancestor, named James Darling, he actually went on record with someone else from the village in Salem and declared Mary Eastie a witch. And there's an actual document still. I mean, it talks in by thine. I don't know what they're saying, but but yeah. But a lot of people don't know that John Haythorne, who was the magistrate at that time, is related to Nathaniel Hawthorne. And Hawthorne actually added the W in his last name to kind of escape from that notoriety. I just thought it was interesting. I love little bits like that. So I might pick that up.
Nice.
That's cool. Yeah, it's a great book. I'd recommend that. Other pop culture things, I've been catching up on whatever like sci-fi series. The One on Netflix is a really interesting, like, if you've read Lincoln Child has a book out from like several years ago called The Perfect Match, where they do like use genetic and artificial intelligence to match two people together. And so this book, The One, is a Netflix series. It's not based on that, but it's kind of the same concept. And all of the things, like, whereas Lincoln Childs was all about what goes wrong with the match couples, this one is about all the little like scandalous stuff that happens in the corporation that's fueling all that stuff. So it's a different perspective. I'll yield the floor because I tend to talk a lot.
It's all right.
God,
Well, if you enjoy history, one of the things, my two books really kind of go in two different directions. I have one series, which is Swarm, which goes into artificial intelligence, advanced weapons, geopolitical, politics. It really kind of goes into and tries to really get as close to reality as possible with real good premises that basically say, yes, and if this happens, this is where we're at. So it really tries to kind of make that thriller real. It tries to hinge off of the nightly news and basically take it just a little bit farther out. The other one really kind of goes back into, you mentioned history, and I love Latin American history. I'm a nut.
You said Cortez. Yeah, I was going to ask about that.
So that really brings in what that will bring into is Mayan mythology, multiple creation myth. That will bring in the whole Mayan calendar. Why did, which wasn't built by the Olmecs, by the way, but why was it a 5,126 year long calendar? How did that relate to their ancient history that we don't know about? The Mayan prophet Balam, who basically prophesied that the Spanish were coming. He also prophesied that there would be a big change at the end of the era. They called him an epoch. And so what everyone thought was going to be the end of the world prophecy, I actually bring in what that prophecy was and what it really meant. And I tie back all of that to Henry Morgan's true story of his lost, abandoned, I call it abandoned $1 billion blunder, where he lost 450 souls, 3 ships, and 30 tons of stuff.
No.
But he wouldn't ever tell anybody what happened. He actually burned his logbooks before he died.
I heard about that. Yes.
Mitchell Hedges, who was a famous treasure hunter in the early 1900s, basically claiming that he had found Atlantis, then stealing a whole bunch of gold. And all of these, and there was a pilgrimage that the Spanish, and I bring in the Spanish Inquisition, which kind of ties a lot of this together. So all of these things, it's an epic story that basically goes through. It's an action adventure of the modern day, from a family on this small island in the Caribbean. And when an earthquake destroys part of her home, she discovers these things that opens up this Pandora's box of curses, this curse that's been on her family for 350 years. And she hates the idea of a curse, so she's about to prove that it's a bunch of baloney, and basically she opens up this whole Pandora's box.
You don't go poking and stuff you don't understand.
We all know how that turns out.
And it's gonna argue both. It's gonna argue that it doesn't exist. It's gonna argue that it does exist, but in different. So you'll actually find it goes into a lot of. It has some paranormal into it, but it's a really fascinating story that really kind of encompasses an epic story of Latin America from thousands of years ago up to the present, and through this one family.
It's interesting because you're just speaking my language right now, because in the book, obviously she goes to Peru, and there's a lot of history down there, especially.
Yeah, exactly.
Do I smell a collaboration coming on?
Yeah, to me, that's my whole series of that one book is to go through all of that alternate history of what really happened in because we don't really know, but we're starting to really learn. We're starting to discover and understand the complexity of the cultures that were actually already in Latin America before the Spanish, thousands of years before the Spanish arrived. Yeah.
When is that coming out?
Should come out June, July. I'm expecting the editor back May 5th. Designers working on it.
Nice.
So it's close.
Where do I buy your books?
It'll be on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles. I'll have it kind of in a few different places.
All right, sounds good.
But when you talk about history, and particularly when you talk about Peru, that's like one of my bucket lists is to go spend months down there.
Oh, those catacombs, those were eerie. I have pictures, of course, because I'm that tourist in places. I'm taking pictures of stuff I'm not supposed to be. But there's you walk into this very small antechamber in the main cathedral, and everything is very. You would think being underground, it would be cold and dark and damp, but it was very warm. It was like too hot. It was weird. But you're walking on a scaffolding, and over each side you can look down, and there's literally like a separated pit, and there's a skeleton smiling up at you.
Yeah.
And you can just take any bones you want with you, right?
No, you can't reach them.
Free bones?
I mean, not that I would.
Yeah.
Just teasing.
You never know who you're going to bring into your home.
Right.
Yeah, but these people buried, I think they were monks or people of well renown, and they were somebody within the society. But then you walk a little bit further, and then you come into this huge dome-like room, and there's just all of these skulls hanging out on the walls, and just bones lying around, and it was rad.
Yeah.
Do you find that you use that kind of imagery in your books? You say, oh, I saw this, I'm going to describe it and put this character here.
I try to, because you know what other better way of expressing your experiences is through writing in some way, shape, or
For sure.
And I think the more that you can bring it back to something real, documentable, that's
There's this house, and I had to put this in there because when I was doing research, there's some distasteful history. I mean, everywhere, but there was this house where that I definitely wanted to feature in this book. Apparently this woman, God, I'm drawing a blank on her name, but she murdered her entire family in this house, and it said that she is seen looking out the window like she's still there. So I had to,
Wow, intense.
Arvena, I don't know.
Well, sounds like she wanted some alone time.
Right. Yeah. It's like, tired of these kids all over the place, bother me all the time.
Too noisy.
I mean, it was probably a pandemic. Like, it's COVID right now, and I've got a house full of family, so.
Oh.
I'm just joking.
I just made a meal.
Right.
Hey, Angela, I think you'll know this. I really do love ghost tours and stuff. And since you're from the area, what can you recommend? Or actually for anybody, really. I guess you're all around here if you're into that sort of thing. Have you done that here? And what do you think is the one?
If you're into that sort of thing, you should see my bookshelf. It's full of like stories from the Pacific Northwest. And anyway, one is really, really close to me. I haven't actually gone to check it out yet, just because I don't know. I think when some things are so close to you that you're kind of like, oh, they're the last thing you think of to go visit when you have a day that you can go and visit something. But I don't know if you've heard of, I think her name was Linda Hazard, in the Olala Sanitarium, where she basically starved like 3 or 4 people to death. Some sort of progressive health cleanse.
Also, so it's like one of those things like back in the 19th century, right, where they're like, oh, you're sick, let's pour like heroin into you.
Let's put some leeches on your body and bleed it out. Bloodletting. So they just starved it out, and I think a couple of people were rescued from there, but I think the remains of the building, or at least the foundation or whatever, are still standing. People have seen some interesting things there, so that might be one place to start.
All right, good.
How about you ever been on the underground tour around here?
Oh yes,
that's pretty good.
Yeah, that was weird. Like looking up, and you could actually, they had a couple of like skylight type things, and it's a little too.
No, I haven't. What's the underground tour?
Oh, it's the underground Seattle. Like you start out in Pioneer Square, at a bar. I can't remember the name of the bar.
So essentially, Seattle was originally built, and everything, they called it Skid Row because I guess when a good rain hit Seattle, everything would.
They'd use Skid Row to push the logs down to the sound for shipping.
And so they ended up rebuilding Seattle kind of up higher, like on a platform or whatever.
Yeah, because the original Seattle burnt down. There was a huge fire, and Seattle burnt, and then they built on top of like what was left. So you can still go underground, and they give you a tour.
Not creepy at all.
Yeah, not creepy at all. Yeah.
I'm gonna do that.
I think those underground tours are fascinating. I just watched a video of Naples. That Naples has some of the most incredible underground space. They actually have entire cities that were buried by mud from Vesuvius that are still intact. They have entire
Yeah.
walls, shoppings. This one was a bakery. This one was that. And they have like, they have scenes where it's like a quarter of a mile street long underground, the current city of Naples. And they just, it goes all over the place, and they just dug it out, and they dug out millions and millions of tons, and there's an entire city under Naples.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's crazy, like with the archaeology, like sometimes you're like, how do they know this? Like, oh, a child stood here and played with a yo-yo like,
right. You're like
1,000 years ago. You're like,
I
how
think
do you
you're
know
making
that?
this up. Who's your boss? Because I need to talk to him.
Everybody's got to make up stories.
Exactly. Yeah.
Everyone's a storyteller.
So
Well, I actually tell people that we are one of the only creatures that has story in our DNA. We cannot, from the time that we start learning, the time we learn how to communicate, everything we learn is about stories, is about how to do this, how to do that. Mommy did this, Johnny did that. You know, look at Johnny run, look at the dog run, the dog says bark. You know, everything we learn is elements of story. We're a linguistic species.
We just tell them in different ways.
Yeah.
Very true.
Nice.
Yeah.
Now, my premise is that if we had, and actually this is based on, I think, some truth, if we could get our artificial intelligence, if we basically base artificial intelligence rather than on a task basis, if our artificial intelligence was designed and built basic on linguistics, in other words, just like we learn, apple means this, run means that. If we basically built linguistic-based artificial intelligence, then we're now starting to get to the kind of artificial intelligence that we're all expecting. And I believe that the government's already started doing that.
It's coming.
Yeah. No, if it were linguistic based, I'm curious kind of how it would be able to discern like connotation or sarcasm.
Well, there's certainly some challenges there, but that's the basis of how we communicate and how we do translations to anything else. The reason the government started with linguistics is because it was designed initially as an espionage tool.
Oh, wow.
Check out, so there's Deep Dream, which might interest you guys. I just posted a link for that in the chat here. And there's also, this is like something that I'm really into. So, and then there's nltk.org. Check that out when you get a chance. You don't have to do it right this second. But Deep Dream is basically trying to like find out what's going on in the heads of these natural language processors. If you haven't looked at that yet, and NLTK.
Oh no, interesting.
Yeah, NLTK is natural language processing. So it attempts to write like stories and stuff.
Oh,
so
wow.
Exactly. So they're teaching it to write short stories, which means it has an understanding of character and language, and you can. Those are all basic skills. Those are all not basic skills. Those are all rules-based paradigms. So just like we can teach kids the rules of grammar, we can teach a computer.
So that's interesting coming at it from that end, because I work for the government, and I'm working on machine learning and neural networks, right? And it's like the other approach, other than you have the linguistic learning, but I have all this math that I'm doing to try to get it to learn.
Math is certainly the other side of the coin.
So it's funny that, and if we get them together, then we're in trouble.
If you want to get really deep into it, I mean, everything has some sort of a formula to it. Even writing, there's a formula, an algorithm, if you will. So that's interesting.
Wow, I could talk about this stuff for a whole hour, but we just brought up the subject and we only have 5 minutes left. So we always do this ourselves. But so I just want to do a couple of plugs here. I've read Swarm, and that's a fantastic book. If you get a chance,
thank you, sir.
It's definitely worth checking it out. And
I bought it. I have not read it yet.
It's actually based on a lot of factual truths. I've spun a really good story out of it, but most of the facts within the story are factual, including the existence of Sylvia. Now, I've elaborated a little bit, but Sylvia started, I discovered this story back in the 90s. There was a scientific article, and I can't remember which magazine. It was an AP article, so it was a qualified article. And it was one of those little short articles, if something happened and this is what we're doing about it, we'll tell you more later. And the story was a program had escaped the Lawrence Livermore laboratories at Sandia, and then it named the doctor in charge of the program and the FBI agent in charge of the investigation. But what hung up for me was that it didn't say the program had been lost, didn't say it had been stolen, didn't say it had been polluted
or corrupted or anything. Yeah.
The verb that the article used was escape. And I thought for a long time, I said, that's either a slip, that's either a typo, or that's a really important slip.
Right.
So I said, okay, well, let me just, I was in software engineering at the time and work. And so I said, well, let me just try and see what kind of program, how would I architect a program such that it could physically leave a technology laboratory? How would I, so there was distributed processing architectures of different types. And I studied the number of those, and some of those could work. And you had basic web crawlers and a bunch of other technologies. And this was around the times of Stuxnet, which in Stuxnet was a virus that wandered the internet for years until it found a specific site that had specific centrifuges with specific serial number IPs. And then
I've studied Stuxnet as part of my cybersecurity training. So
exactly. So that was the same era. So I basically created, okay, well, I decided, well, let's assume it's true. And so I said Sandia was an espionage lab. So I said it worked for the NSA. So I said, this is an espionage tool. So what would I want an espionage tool to do? And so at the time, I basically gave it all kinds of tools. I said, well, it can turn on my webcam without turning on the light and telling me. It can basically spoof and watch my keyboard for my what I'm typing. It could digitally record my analog voice and then create a digital version of my analog voice to basically tell my secretary, hey, I forgot my password. It could do all these different things. And basically it had backdoor chips, and we discovered these backdoor chips through viruses like Spectre and some other viruses that were actually embedded in some of the early chips that were assigned government backdoors. And so Silvio's job was simply go out through the internet, go catalog everything, tell us what everybody else has out there, and come back and tell us. It was a linguistics program. Well, that was so I created a webisode series, and I was really popular. I was about ready to get published by AOL. It was a really big deal. We had fans. I had fans that from all over the world, from Israel, from London, from Germany, from the NASA, from FBI. And then a week before AOL was going to sign the deal, the FBI came to my house and told me to take the site down. When I asked them why, they lied to me and told me some baloney reason about, well, we're afraid that terrorists could use it to plan things against the U.S. And I knew that was a bunch of baloney. So so it turned out later, though, here's the end of the story. In 2016, there was a story that the Russians had hacked an old CIA cyber toolkit. And in that cyber toolkit was virtually every single one of the attributes I had given to Sylvia.
Oh, no.
So what it told me was that they came to my house because I had guessed correctly. I just reverse engineered. I said, well, if I had a spy program that could escape, what would it do? You know?
Right.
Oh, my Lord.
And they said, we don't want you telling everybody about this. And so they shut me down, and I tucked my tail between my legs and got a job at Oracle and went off and didn't do anything. But after I saw the 2016 article from the CIA, when that article, that was what motivated me to say, I have to write this story.
Right.
And that's where the story of Swarm came from.
Yeah.
Cool.
Beautiful. That's a great story. I love hearing that story.
That's a great story because it's so. I tell you, when the FBI came to my house, my wife came out to me and said, "What did you do?"
Awesome.
So I just wanted to also say that I am looking at your site right now, Angela, this Asylum book that's coming out in May. Is that still coming out in May, or is that coming out? Has that changed?
Which one?
The Asylum, the Choose Your Own.
Asylum, yeah. It is still coming out in May.
Okay. I am looking forward to that. I can't wait to see what that looks
Appreciate it. I hope it's good. One thing that I really want to focus on, because but then again, it was playing to a younger audience. There just wasn't a whole lot of meat for a plot or anything like that to those more young adult books. But I want to kind of work in. I mean, essentially, you wake up in an asylum. You're tied down to a bed. You have who you are, how you got there, and there's something clawing at the door.
Nice.
The setup, and then you're like, what do you do? You're like,
Right. Do you try to escape the window? Do you try to, yeah.
Do you piss your pants?
That would be the first one. Yes,
that's
an unavoidable one.
Well, you're tied to the bed, so first you got to get out of the bed.
Right, yeah.
Exactly.
Use your pee fear to lubricate your hands to untie
Bed
yourself.
goes in front of the door, and then and then I
Hey, you've read this book, haven't you, Justin?
Yep.
I'm just thinking it through.
All right, guys. So we spent another great Saturday morning. Appreciate everybody coming. I think that's about all we have for time for.
Yeah.
So thanks, Guy. Thanks, Angela, and as usual, Justin.
Angela, wonderful to meet
Thanks,
you.
guys. Yeah,
You as well.
wonderful.
You as well.
You
I
guys,
can't
Justin, Charles, thank you again.
Sure.
Thanks,
you're always
Guy.
welcome to come back, all of you. So
Hey,
yeah.
one quick thing I want to point out, Justin,
Yes.
Seattle boy,
Yes.
Steelers, really?
I'm from Pittsburgh originally.
Oh, okay. I'll let it pass.
Yeah, I grew up in Pittsburgh.
Awesome.
All right. All right. See you.
My mom sent me this shirt.
There you go.
All right.
Take care,
It's
everybody.
great meeting you guys.
Thanks, guys. You as well. Bye-bye.